Zoom and on audio, and we're good to go. Again, Scott, if I'm a fool, let me know. I can take stuff out, or you can call me out. Call me out. I love it when people call me out because there's been days where I'm just tired and I miss up on something simple, like when I did my season previews episodes and I called the Metropolitan the Atlantic the whole time. That was fun.
Yeah, good times. Because real leagues have to change their divisions year after year, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right, here we go. We're recording. Good. It's time for this week's Trending Now. Joining to discuss what is trending and what everybody's talking about are Scott Cullen. He covers the Toronto Maple Leafs for Torhockeynow and also writes on hockey prospects and fantasy for The Athletic and McKeen's Hockey. You can find him, Scott, on Twitter by Scott Cullen. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And of course, my old pal DB joined the show again. You can find him, of course, on Sirius XM NHL Network, and of course on Kings of the Podcast covering the LA Kings. You can find him on Twitter at Dennis TFP. DB, what's up?
Oh, good, Peter. Just back from Canada. Survived the all the protocols to get in the country and get back out. So great to be with you again.
How'd you enjoy Canada? It's been a long time, right?
It's been over 2 years. Well, actually, I was in Edmonton for the Cup final, but that wasn't even like being in Canada, to be frank. Yeah. I got quarantined for 14 days. I was in an empty arena. To go to Scotiabank and to go to Bell Center in front of capacity crowds was just amazing, wonderful, and just a reminder of how great this game is in Canada. So I was happy to come up and see a couple of Kings games, and they actually won. So it was a good luck charm for them for at least a couple of games.
Yeah. And describe how amazing those hot dogs are apparently in the Bell Center.
Yeah, there's a debate. So they're hot dogs, but they're like on a slice of bread, and they taste real because they're light. They're not big, heavy hot dogs, and they're legendary at Bell Center in the press room. So I had to have one. I had to take a picture and put it on Twitter, and then of course there's a debate about the hot dog, and it wasn't fully on the bun, and it's hot dog a sandwich, which conversation. So, but it was just like great to be back and be around all the history of the Bell Center in front of a capacity crowd. So it was a lot of fun. So those hot dogs are unique, and I enjoy them, but they're not for everyone.
All right, let's get to the trending now. Of course, anybody listening on the YouTube or on any of the podcasts out there, Spotify or whatever, you can go to jablamsports.com/season 7, episode 7 already. Wow. So on Saturday, I'm going to be talking about Saturday all episode here. Minnesota Wild continued their hot play so far this season, but who in the blue is Minnesota Wild's hat trick scorer, Rem Pitlick? Anybody know, Scott?
Well, I mean, what I know of Rem Pitlick is he was a Predators prospect who they put on waivers, and because he's from Minnesota, there was no chance he was getting past the Wild on waivers. And I mean, it's simplistic to say that, but I mean, there is kind of a thing with people like with players from Minnesota and the Wild that they'll just they will give them, if you're going to get one last chance, the Wild will give it to you. And so Pitlick, I mean, he'd been, reasonably productive in the American Hockey League. So it's not, inconceivable that he could kind of carve out an NHL spot. Now, to score his first 3 goals of his career all in one game, maybe that's a little bit unusual, but I think, he's at least getting a fair chance here in Minnesota.
Hey, Parise is getting a second last chance, I guess, with the Islanders. DB, just unbelievable that the Wild just keep on finding these amazing things, like Kaprizov, obviously. Now he's making the big bucks, but now Rem.
Yeah, well, look, their core is really good. The organization, it's I could keep going back to Kaprizov. That's one guy. Remember, that was a boring average team with him. And one player galvanizes an organization. Look, if I'm Pitlick, I'm taking those 3 pucks, putting in my trophy case in my man cave, and that's probably going to be the highlight of his career at this point in time. If he does something more than that, that's great. But they have and they're still underrated, right? Because people thought Colorado's going to bounce back. St. Louis is really doing good things. But this team, They're serious. And remember, they gave Vegas, even though Vegas got knocked out by Montreal, give them all they can. They took them to 7 games last year. So it's not so. It's surprising that Rem Pitlick did it, but it's not surprising in their success because it's just the body of work is not too big to say this is a flash in the pan. It's a team that can't trend in that direction. It's just a really good team that I think forever is going to be underrated. Probably, Scott, because they do play in Minnesota, so we're going to get the true press again. But, well coached, smart team, don't beat themselves, and they have a star player in Kaprizov leading them. Plus, they're still getting in goaltending if they need to win games.
You know who's one of the most fascinating players for them this year is Ryan Harpin. A guy who's he's had a decent NHL career to this point, but it kind of came up as an agitator and so on. But like this year, he's a much more dangerous offensive threat. Like he's getting 2 more shots per game than he had last year. And that kind of spike in his offensive production has just made him, a much better player for them. Like he's, he offers a whole lot more than he had previously. And so, he's not ever going to be a star, but I think, when you're trying to find supporting cast behind Kaprizov, a guy like Ryan Hartman's actually, been really helpful for them.
Let's move on to the powerhouse, maybe the best sniper of all time. He's now hit 4th spot, just jumped ahead of Brett, the Golden Brett Hull. 4th in NHL history. It's crazy. The one thing I'm wondering is everybody, even like 4 years ago, we were like, he's going to slow down. And he is now scoring not from his usual power play spot. He's dominating now and scoring 5-on-5. Why DB is the great 8 playing differently and somehow seemingly even better and still adapting his play and finding new ways to score at the age of 36.
Well, if they're going to win games at this point, PB, they don't still have Backstrom. He has to do more for them to win. So he's not just going to his office on the power play, like I said, he's doing what's necessary to win because the guy is a winner, right? Remember his legacy when he couldn't be 87 in the playoffs, and he was never going to do it. Now he did it. Now he's just solely focused on breaking this record, and his team's still good around him. I think that's the key. I think we are being assumptive here that he signed that contract to break the record, without question. The team has to stay good around him, and so far they are. It's a really nice start. I think Scott will agree. I'm not sure about their goaltending. I think that's their fatal flaw. I don't think they're a dangerous team for the playoffs. But he's just doing what necessary, and necessary is going to different places on the ice, at least this time around, while his guys mend and score goals. But it's not shocking. It's not surprising that he's at the top of the goal leaders board at this point.
Scott, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, he's always throughout his career. I mean, it's, every player is hungry to score goals, but not in the way that Ovechkin is, right? And so, yes, he loves setting up in the power play spot. But if you tell him, you have to go to the back post, you have to go grab this rebound, you need to tip this in, he's happy to do all of that stuff because it means getting goals. I think he has taken on maybe a bit more responsibility early this season because, the Backstrom injury. I mean, that's huge. Backstrom is a really important player for them. And the fact that Ovechkin has kind of continued to roll even in Backstrom's absence. I mean, that it also helps that Kuznetsov has had a bounce back season, right? Like there's a lot of responsibility heaped upon Kuznetsov with no Backstrom. When they're all healthy, you kind of go, oh, you got Backstrom, you got Kuznetsov 1-2 down the middle, you're all set. Well, when you take one away, that puts a lot of pressure on Kuznetsov, who's coming off what was a down season. He didn't really have his best year last year for sure. And so I think Ovechkin has taken on this responsibility, and really the reason that I expect that he's probably going to catch Gretzky is he never gets hurt. Like, right. It's a stereotype kind of thing. There's a website called Russian Machine Never Breaks, and it's based on Ovechkin, right? Like the guy's missed like 15 games in 11 years or in the last 11 years or something. Like it's and like he missed some games last year because of COVID violation, like not even injury. And so I just think that the fact that he has been so durable, it's making it somewhat inevitable that he's going to catch Gretzky, which, I mean, a few years ago that sounded preposterous, but we're kind of the direction we're heading. It doesn't sound so preposterous anymore.
Yeah. DB has called out Kuznetsov in the past. We know that. Yeah. Like he's like, what is he? And apparently he is. so far this season.
Yeah.
But we've seen the commercials. We know of the past of him, Ovi, tied in with Backstrom. Apparently, he's tighter with Backstrom than his own wife.
That is an awesome commercial. I love it.
That is. It's great. But and look, remember, and talk about Kuznetsov. What was all the chatter in the offseason? They're done with his act. They're going to trade him. The COVID thing. Thank goodness they didn't trade him. They would be sunk without him.
Yeah.
And he's responded. He's stepped up. So sometimes there's two guys like that. And Tarasenko's the same way. He didn't like the way he was treated, the surgeries, all this other stuff. What happened? Like Tarasenko's got 7 goals already, and they're at the top of the division. So sometimes it's the trades that you don't make, PB, that are the better trades.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, the rebounding of the seasons coming up. And sometimes it seems like, are these Russian players playing better because the Olympics is coming up?
They do tend to like playing for their country. We'll give them that. But I mean, look, if you're Ovechkin, I mean, he could have no goals right now and he'd still be playing for them in the Olympics. Like that's a given, right?
Yeah. All right. So, of course, the Hockey Hall of Fame announced their inductees to the 2021, and that's 5 players, 1 builder. Ken Holland, of course, as the builder. Kim St. Pierre, Marian Hossa, Jerome McGinley, Doug Wilson, and Kevin Lowe. DB, you got a story there for me?
Yeah, when Iggy came to Los Angeles, he was at the end, right? I mean, he just traded. Darryl Sutter's here, his presence. But if you go back and remember the elbow that Chucky threw at Drew Doughty, and there was a whole to-do and a whole big to-do about that, Iggy stood up and before the game when there was a beef at center ice, and he went with Derek England. And I remember that. And so here's a guy who hadn't really no connection to the franchise other than Darryl, his old coach. He would stand up for Drew Doughty, who was a star player, and say, "Hey, look, this isn't gonna linger at this point." And I do remember being in a room, and Iggy never refused, for me at least, a couple of times, a request for an interview. Always took the time, was never in a rush. So, you talk about a Hall of Fame player. This is a Hall of Fame person because you hear all the platitudes played towards his player. So to me, it's just the experience. At the short time he had in Los Angeles, I get it. I get the reverence. I get. Look, he wasn't the star player he was in Calgary, but I get why people talk so highly about this legend of the game, and that's truly what he is, PB.
Jerome he oozes kindness. It just seems like that is who he is, in and out. And when you mention the fighting thing too, it just reminds me of he's fought a lot of enforcers his entire career, where a superstar player would just never do that. It's crazy.
He also had one of the most famous superstar fights ever. Right, when he and LeCavalier went in the Cup final, like you never see guys of that caliber, particularly like those guys were in their prime, and for them to go in the middle of a Cup final, that was unusual.
Oh my goodness! I always bothers me how different the game changes, even from the first round to later on rounds, and everybody's afraid to do things after. They're like, "Oh, my team's already this far. I'm afraid to do something." But the Leafs aren't, or have to not be too afraid. On Saturday night, obviously Morgan Riley helped pull out the win with 11 seconds remaining in regulation versus the lowly Buffalo Sabres. But between the pipes was a rookie, Joesph Woll, getting his first NHL start and win. How big was that for Woll, and what is his possible potential, Scott?
Well, I mean, it's great for him to get the win in his NHL debut. I think under perfect circumstances, there is no way he'd be in the NHL right now. If you're the Maple Leafs, Joesph Woll is 23. His track record to this point doesn't say, "Oh, this guy's NHL ready." And I think their expectation was that he'd play in the American Hockey League all of this year, and then you can kind of reevaluate things. But Peter Mrazek has not been able to stay healthy, and so the Maple Leafs have had to dip into the farm system and see who can make spot starts basically. And they brought up Michael Hutchinson first, and he struggled in his start against San Jose. And so, okay, we'll look for someone else. They give Joesph Woll a start, and he played all right. The tough thing for Woll is that the Leafs were pretty sloppy in their own right. Like they gave up some pretty awful opportunities against him. And so now in the post game, Joesph Woll was, very complimentary of the team in front of him and all that. And then you talk to all the players, and they were like apologizing for how terrible they were because, they gave up some, grade A chances to this kid who's making his first start. But all's well that ends well, I think, in that case. But I think overall, the Maple Leafs are basically going to try and, get by. And if Joesph Woll ends up getting another start or two while Mrazek is out, so be it. But I think they want to get him to the American Hockey League where he can play. And then you can reevaluate him long term. But I mean, the ideal for the Maple Leafs is to have Campbell and Mrazek available, because right now, Jack Campbell hasn't played more than 31 games in an NHL season, and he's on pace to start like 60 plus. So that's there's some risk there. And as great as Campbell has been, it's not going to feel great if all of a sudden he gets hurt and he's out long term as well.
DB, you've seen Campbell for many years as well.
Yeah.
Is he too nice? And is it possible for him to play 60 plus games?
He's not too nice. It's possible, but I think Scott hit the initial point. Mrazek is never healthy. Like when they sign him, I'm like, okay, when he's on, he's a streaky goaltender, but he's always hurt. I think that's the key. So, and look, Jack's playing for a contract too. And the comparable to Jack is Cal Peterson here in Los Angeles. That's $5 million for 3 years. He's trying to earn that contract, but it's just, I think this game has changed so much. It's dangerous to have a goalie playing more than 60, 65 games, because if you're going to have an elongated run in the playoffs, that's a lot of games. That's going to be 80 some odd games. And there's no Mika Kiprasov, and Scott knows that name from way back in the day. The guys don't play 72 games in the regular season anymore. It's 60, it's 55, you want 55, maybe 35 or something like that. So to me, he hasn't, and Scott said he hasn't been used a lot. So there's not a lot of tread off the tires. But I think you're really rolling the dice if he gets up in the 60s with respect to that. You need Peter Mrazek healthy. And he's not going to be healthy. I think at the deadline, they got to figure out another way to bring in maybe another veteran presence if you can't depend on Mrazek.
That's a good comment there, DB. I always said that sometimes you don't want to overplay your goalie and make sure they're fresh. We saw that with Braden Holtby. The one season when they played him less, he was a little more fresh in the playoffs. And you've seen that a little bit with Jonathan Quick as well. He had more energy and he was able to kind of have a better second half and run for the playoffs for the Kings, right?
Yeah. And now look at Jonathan Quick. And also they be challenged, right? Cal Peterson was the guy. Todd McCullen told me last week, like, because of his age and his contract, because he got the extension, we want Cal to emerge. But guess what? Jonathan Quick is too prideful. And he said, yeah, you know what? Not yet. I'm not giving up my net yet. So it's just interesting how these goalies bounce back.
Again, you can find them on Twitter at Dennis TFP for DB, and for Scott at by Scott Cullen. In our next segment, we'll discuss the Ottawa Senators and how COVID is running rampant in the dressing room. Cool. Done.
Thanks a lot, Peter.